Edit audio.
This episode contains subject matters of violence, sexual assault, and self-harm. Please take care while listening. In the last episode of Ozark's True Crime, the Sandra Hemme story, we told you about the Melvin Lee Reynolds case and how similar it is to Sandy's.
It does seem oddly coincidental. I think there's a good reason to take a close look at that connection.
How many of the same detectives and prosecutors were involved, and how Sandy and Melvin were both patients at the state hospital. In this episode, we're in the courtroom at Sandy's long-awaited evidentiary hearing. When I get off the plane in Kansas City, I look at my phone, and I see that I had just received an email from the Missouri court's case system. I get these often, but this recent request stuck out to me. It was a motion to allow petitioner, which is Sandy, to dress appropriately for court and sit without hand shackles during court proceedings. Our team flew in for this just yesterday, so we're working hard to quickly prepare. And the sound might be a bit different in the next 3 episodes. That's because we're in Chillicothe, Missouri, instead of our regular studio in New York City. The drive from the Kansas City airport to Chillicothe, Missouri takes about an hour and a half, but the snow and ice piled on the ground make the drive a bit longer. Chillicothe's claim to fame is being the first ever place to sell sliced bread. You'll find plenty of wooden signs, mugs, or rugs that say, "Chillicothe, the best town since sliced bread." I've been here only a couple of times in my life, but it was a long time ago, and only a few things look familiar. The courthouse, where we'll be going each day, hasn't changed. I met our team at the Airbnb, which will be our home base and makeshift studio for the next 8 days.
Annie! Hi!
The house is a 5-minute walk from the Livingston County Courthouse where Sandy's evidentiary hearing will take place. It's a beautifully restored Craftsman, built in 1919, with a pretty porch and original wood detailing. There's a kitchen with a large island, where we've gathered to have our morning coffee and prepare for the day. So here we are. It's Tuesday, January 16th at 8:15 a.m., and the first day of the hearing. I just got back from Australia late last night, and the jet lag is pretty rough. But this case and the upcoming hearing has us all wired. We've been working on this for most of 2023, and the time has finally come. And while the courthouse is just a couple of blocks away, we decide to drive. The sidewalks are icy and it's freezing.
It's so cold.
On our way, we pass Calvary Baptist Church, the Livingston County Library, Life Point Church, and Shooter's Tap Room.
Big way. It's in like 3 stops, but what's this mural?
This is the sliced bread.
We arrive at the courthouse about 20 minutes early and are waiting to enter the room where Sandy's hearing will take place. There are a few benches outside, sort of like a waiting room. I immediately see Larry Harmon, who I've spoken to once on the phone but not on record. He's wearing a nice suit and a hat. Sandy's 2 sisters are there, as is her daughter Melissa, who introduces herself to me as Sandy's biological daughter. She tells me that she was just 2 when her mom went to prison. I ask how she's feeling, and she's guarded, but she tells me that she has mixed emotions. She also told me that she listened to the trailer of the podcast, and she thanked our team. And then she introduces me to her daughter, Sandy's granddaughter, who is in law school at the University of Missouri. My producers, myself, and about 10 other people are sitting on or standing around the benches, chatting quietly when the elevator doors open and 2 people walk out, escorting Sandy. The room suddenly goes silent, and the sound of the shackles rattling against each other seems extra jarring. Sandy has gray hair, shorter in the back than on the sides. She has thick, dark-rimmed glasses and is wearing a short-sleeved, brownish-green uniform, a fluorescent orange beanie, and a warm-looking work jacket. There are shackles on her feet. I hear her granddaughter say, "At least she has a jacket. I was worried about that." And it's at this moment that I have to choke back tears. It catches me by surprise. I very rarely get emotional about cases or subjects. The courtroom doors open at 9 a.m., and as we file in, Larry Harmon turns and says to me, "I'm sorry I've not been very responsive to you. It's for professional reasons." I was fairly sure Larry would be here today as a witness, so it makes sense that he wouldn't respond to my emails. Witnesses were asked not to speak to the press. We then filed into the courtroom and found our seats among the benches. A sheriff at the front of the courtroom loudly says, "All rise," and we stand for Judge Ryan Horstman, who is overseeing the evidentiary hearing for Sandra Hemme and is the presiding judge of 43rd Circuit. In researching the judge, I find out that he's a youth soccer coach and was part of a local theater group, starring as Bill in the play Sure Thing in 2019. It's a fun detail to think that under that dark robe is a theater fan. And just a quick note for this episode. Instead of using the term prosecution, which would be the case in a trial, here you'll hear us say Attorney General's office or the respondents, which is the term used in an evidentiary hearing. Sandy's lawyers from the Innocence Project sit on the left side of the courtroom, and the lawyers representing the Attorney General's office on the right. It's a sea of dark suits. I see Attorney Sean O'Brien up there, who I've interviewed, and you'll hear more from later. He gives me a smile and a wave. Sandy sits to his right. They're sandwiched between two other lawyers from the Innocence Project. Jane Poocher is on the left and Andrew Lee on the right. They've brought along about 6 colleagues, paralegals and such, for support. They sit in the benches behind them taking notes and digging through the mounds of binders. Sandy's sisters are a couple of rows behind, and her daughter and granddaughter just behind them. The Innocence Project calls their first witness, Larry Harmon. After he's sworn in and takes the stand, he talks about how he's worked on thousands of criminal cases and north of 50 murder cases. He represented Sandy in the fall of 1981 when her mother and father requested his services. Harmon took an extensive look at Sandy's files and then went to see her at Rent's farm where she was in prison. The first thing he says about Sandy's demeanor is that, "I thought she was ill." Since we weren't allowed to bring recording devices into the courtroom, each day after the trial, our team would debrief back at the Airbnb, poring over pages and pages of scrawled handwritten notes and trying to fact-check everything we heard that day. In the next episodes, you're going to hear from the team who was with me in Missouri, Steph, Allie, and Kathleen.
I thought it was interesting too, him describing meeting Sandy for the first time. He said, I could understand her, but I'm not sure she was understanding me.
He said that he tried to speak to her about the case, but that she kept telling contradictory stories, that she blamed different people for the murder, and then said she watched them do it. While Larry was talking about Sandy's ability to understand what was happening in these early stages, we saw our first moment of courtroom drama. Here's Kathleen.
This was the first objection in the trial. They said, how vulnerable was Sandy to persuasion? And then I think it was overruled because then the answer I have is, I thought she could have pled guilty to killing John Kennedy.
There were other suspects brought to attention. Joe Wobski, who you've heard about, an unnamed female, and Michael Holman. Larry Harmon is very thoughtful and thorough in his answers. He talks a lot about Sandy's mental capacity and that she was, quote, off the rails. And I wonder what her family is thinking during this time, but also about what Sandy is thinking. What is it like to hear someone describe you as off the rails, or not being very bright, or that your mind is fried?
The number of times during Larry's testimony that they spoke negatively about Sandy's just mental state in general and how hard that must have been for the family and Sandy to sit through.
On the first day of trial, a lot of time is spent talking about the earrings. You probably remember these from episode 2, those distinct wishbone earrings found in the home of Michael Holman. Earrings that Patricia's dad confirmed he bought for her at a gift shop in Montana. The Innocence Project asks multiple times why Larry didn't present them at trial, and he's incredulous. His answer, "I didn't even know about them until 10 days ago." This police report was never presented at Sandy's original trial, as we hear time and time again. The respondent cross-examines Larry. They say that these earrings could have been purchased at any Claire's boutique or gas station gift shop between here and New Mexico. It's so interesting to see an attorney cross-examine another attorney. Larry almost seems to know what's coming at him and is so sure in his answers. He's asked why he chose to put Sandy on the stand back in 1981 if she were not competent. There's a lot of quick fire back and forth here, so much that the judge has to request each person wait until the other is finished before speaking. Harmon explains that he knew putting her on the stand was a risk, but that in a nutshell, if she were doing well, it could show her innocence, and if not, show her incompetence. There's more talk about the earrings and their omission to the trial, and at one point Larry is asked what he thought about just learning of the earrings 10 days ago, and he said, "You've got to be kidding me." Larry is excused, and I glance up from my notes to see they've put a coat on Sandy. The next witness to take the stand is Dr. Judith Edersheim, a physician and an attorney. She practices forensic psychiatry and co-founded and co-directs the Center for Law, Brain, and Behavior at Mass General Hospital. There are about 15 minutes devoted to Dr. Edersheim's impressive credentials. The Innocence Project wants to convey that she is absolutely an expert in the field of false confessions. As Dr. Edersheim takes the stand, Sandy turns around and looks at her sisters and they smile. It's a sweet, or rather a bittersweet moment. Dr. Edersheim had studied Sandy's medical history from medical records and court documents provided by Sandy's attorneys. She's here with a report she constructed to paint a picture of Sandy's mental state at the time. She confirms that Sandy started psychiatric care at the age of 12, but began using drugs prior, at about the age of 9. She talks about Sandy receiving electroconvulsive therapy and the repercussions that it can present to memory. She explains the diagnosis that she would give Sandy based on her medical records and history of mental illness, PTSD, borderline personality disorder, and substance abuse, and her symptoms, which included auditory hallucinations. She explained the medication she's taken over the years and their side effects.
I had a quote that said that between 12 years old and 20 years old, Sandy was in and out of psychiatric care, and that if you added up all of the time that she was out of care, like all of the, day passes and times that she was out, it only added up to 3 years total.
Dr. Edersheim also tells the court of some details we hadn't heard before, about when Sandy was sexually assaulted when she was 15 or 16 while alone at night on a pass from the hospital. When Sandy returned back to psychiatric care, she told the staff what had happened and they gave her a drug to prevent pregnancy and penicillin to prevent an STI. Dr. Edersheim also told a story about how Sandy was at a program for troubled teens called Teen Challenge, where she was found tied up in a basement and beaten by peers and staff.
And yeah, so it's like her going through all of these different events that led to Sandy and her diagnoses. So like, oh yeah, there was this one sexual assault that could lead to PTSD. It's like, it was kind of just like a snowball where it just like kept going and going and going. It was very sad to hear.
I'm sitting here listening to this laundry list of trauma-related events that have happened to Sandy. Add to that the addiction and severe mental illness she's living with. This sounds almost trite and too simple, but it's heartbreaking. I look over at Sandy's two sisters who are there to support her. One who had told me that she lived so close to her grandchildren that she got to see them all the time. And it made me think of all the moments Sandy's missed with her family. Dr. Edersheim then speaks about how, in the days leading up to her first interrogation, Sandy was placed on a powerful antipsychotic medication called haloperidol. Dr. Edersheim describes the adverse reaction Sandy had to this medication as giving someone instant Parkinson's disease, and that they often include muscle spasms and terrible body cramps. Sandy was in a lot of pain. On November 28th at 1:45 a.m., Sandy was pounding on the walls in security scream, demanding to be released. She was given an injection of haloperidol again, placed into leather restraints, and given another sedative to make her sleep. It was in this context that police arrived at the St. Joseph State Hospital to interview Sandy. They arrived and began their questioning around 11 a.m. Medical notes at that time describe her as shaking and complaining of her muscles feeling tight. The police who questioned her noted that Sandy was tense, having lapses, and was not comprehensive of questions. I try to imagine what it might be like. To be questioned by police seems terrifying, but to be experiencing extreme pain and symptoms described as instant Parkinson's would be absolutely terrible. Dr. Edersheim confirms my feelings by explaining that when you're experiencing pain, it trumps all other cognitive functions. At this point, our team is so glad we've spent the past year poring over all of these court documents. We've been able to give you a lot of this detailed information in past episodes, and that information is helping us follow along in these 8-hour court days. Dr. Edersheim is on the stand as a witness for more than 3 hours with a lunch break somewhere in between. During her testimony, she confirms that Sandy was questioned by law enforcement numerous times at St. Joseph State Hospital with a doctor present and at the police station. She confirms that Sandy was taken off hospital grounds by 4 police officers and brought to Patricia's house, where they showed Sandy photos of the murder scene. This police interaction took 6 hours, during which Sandy did not receive her prescribed medication that was meant to be administered every 6 hours. Sandy also didn't have any medical supervision while on this police trip. Dr. Edersheim's testimony for the defense ends with her explaining what factors could increase the risk of a false confession, and the list went like this: the environment they are being questioned in, presence and absence of people in a room, physical restraints, sleep deprivation, age and maturity, history of trauma, trouble with reality, auditory hallucinations, mood disorders, pain during interrogation, substance withdrawal, derealization and depersonalization, and the length of the interrogation. Sandy's state while being interrogated by police ticks multiple boxes on Dr. Edersheim's list. Not just one, but practically every one. If you're imagining this as an episode of something like Law and Order or another courtroom drama, it's not far off, maybe just a bit less dramatic. And here, it's a real person's life. We'll be right back after this quick ad break to hear about the Attorney General's cross-examination of Dr. Edersheim. Hey all, if you're a little burnt out from trying to figure out what to cook or order next, I want to tell you about Factor, which are ready-to-eat meals that make it so much easier to eat better every day. I decided to try Factor when I realized how much I was spending on takeout and restaurant meals. When I did the math, Factor was a lot less expensive than takeout. Plus, every meal is dietitian approved to be nutritious and delicious and delivered right to your door. Here's how it works. You'll have over 35 different meal options a week to choose from, including keto, calorie smart, vegan and veggie, and more. I'm a pescatarian, and I can't wait to try this week's pesto salmon and the tomato and roasted vegetable risotto. In addition, there are over 55 nutrition-packed add-ons that can help make your weekly meal planning easier. I'll be tacking on the cold-pressed juice variety pack. Factor meals require zero prep and are 100% ready to heat and eat, so there's no prepping, cooking, or cleanup needed. If you want to give Factor a try, I'm offering an exclusive discount for our listeners. Head to factormeals.com/OzarksTrueCrime50 and use the code OzarksTrueCrime50 to get 50% off. That's OzarksTrueCrime50 at factormeals.com/OzarksTrueCrime50 to get 50% off. As you all know, I'm obsessed with Babyfoot, the original and #1 selling foot peel in America. Babyfoot is the perfect DIY solution for feet. A simple 3-step process. Apply, leave on for an hour, and wash away. My plan is to put on the booties that contain 16 natural extracts, kick up my feet, and basically have an excuse to relax for an hour. 14 days later, and the process will be complete. Your feet will be as soft as a baby's. I also love that I don't have to squeeze in time and not to mention the money for a pedicure. Visit babyfoot.com and enter promo code OzarksCrime24 for 20% off this amazing product. That's babyfoot.com, promo code OzarksCrime24. Taking care of your health isn't always easy, but it should at least be simple. That's why for the last 2 years, I've been drinking AG1 every day, no exceptions. It's just 1 scoop mixed in water once a day, every day, and it makes me feel ready to take on the day. That's because each serving of AG1 delivers my daily dose of vitamins, minerals, pre- and probiotics, and more. It's a powerful, healthy habit that's also powerfully simple. With AG1, I know I'm getting essential brain, gut, and immune health support with vitamins, probiotics, and nutrients from whole foods. I like to think of it as nutritional insurance. I know I'm covering my nutritional bases right from the start of the day. In fact, I brought travel packs for me and my producers while we're away working on this season of the podcast. If there's one product I had to recommend to elevate your health, it's AG1, and that's why I've partnered with them for so long. So if you want to take ownership of your health, start with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3 plus K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase exclusively at drinkag1.com/OzarksTrueCrime. That's drinkag1.com/OzarksTrueCrime. Check it out. So at this point, the respondents are up and they present some documents that outline episodes of serious violence that Sandy had.
I guess the respondents' goal in this case was to basically prove how violent Sandy is. So are trying to prove that she could be a threat to people in society. So I think bringing up all those statements was just, putting that doubt in your head, is she a threat to herself or others?
Dr. Edersheim is then questioned about Sandy's violent behavior. The doctor says it's her first time seeing these documents. They outline a time Sandy reported stabbing her father. Sandy reported hurting her daughter, hurting her sister. Dr. Edersheim said that the key here was that Sandy reported this, and that it's Sandy's account and subjective. Dr. Edersheim also reiterates a point she made earlier on the symptoms of people with borderline personality disorder, which are making global statements and acting with bravado, which makes Sandy's statements not entirely credible. I kept listening to these accounts of Sandy's past and wondering, why did the Innocence Project not present these documents to Dr. Edersheim? And then, if there's a courtroom drama-style element, it's here. The air feels tense and is filled with intent listeners straining to hear over the creaking of courtroom benches. When it's the Innocence Project's turn to question Dr. Edersheim, we learn that over 2,500 new documents were presented to them just last Thursday. The Innocence Project began working on this case years ago.
So it's there's no way the doctor could have reviewed all of those. It's that was kind of a moment where I was oh gosh, okay, yeah, they're burying some things in all of these documents they sent over literally 4 days ago.
But in the end, I'm not sure if it mattered. When Dr. Edersheim was asked by the Innocence Project if any of these new reports changed her mind about her diagnosis of Sandy or the presenting factors of a false confession, Dr. Edersheim firmly says, no, it does not. At 2:55 p.m., Steve Houston, a former employee of the St. Joseph Police Department, takes the stand. He's 75 years old and retired, and you've heard about him in previous episodes. He states that he was assigned as the lead in Sandy's case in 1980. He says that he now has some age-related memory loss, but that he recalls details and recognizes his writing and signature on documents. I've read these documents so many times that I recognize his writing and signature. Houston is asked about how the department worked these cases, and he spoke about how he takes pride in his reports. At this point, they're talking a lot about those wishbone earrings. Houston was the one to take a report of them and confirm that Patricia's father, Earl, purchased them for his daughter at a gift shop in Montana. Houston had the address of where the earrings were found, but didn't know it was Michael Holman's address. The Innocence Project asked Houston if he knew it was Holman's address, would he have noted that? Houston responds with an abrupt yes. When they ask, this may be a silly question, but why? Houston shrugs and he says, it's a fact. Houston talks a lot on the stand about how he remembers interviewing Sandy. He describes her as not seeming cognizant of what was going on, and that it was difficult to follow her information. He says she often didn't make sense. But Houston also said that Dr. Jacks, the director of the hospital, who was also present, told him that Sandy was capable of being interviewed. Houston states for the second time that he's not a doctor, so he didn't care about her diagnosis, only as to whether she was capable. He says he would have relied on Dr. Jacks to step in.
Yeah, at one point they said if the doctor had said, like, we have to stop this, would you have stopped? And he was like, yes.
The Innocence Project then brings up the murder scene and keeps focusing on the floral pattern on Patricia's bedsheet and the pillow that was covering her face. But why exactly, I can't figure out. It's 4:16 p.m., and the Innocence Project is asking Houston questions on what evidence they found connecting Sandy to Patricia's murder. Any fingerprints, they ask. Houston says no. Any trace evidence? No. Any witnesses? No. Any physical evidence? No. As we're dismissed and everyone is filing out of the courtroom, I look over and see Sandy. She's smiling at her sisters and says, "Long time no see." She is then placed in shackles around both wrists and then another around her back. Her heavy coat is buttoned over her body, but her arms can't go inside the sleeves because they're handcuffed in front of her. One of the guards puts on Sandy's bright orange beanie for her, then moves her hair away from her eyes. Sandy then says goodbye to her family and attorneys and walks through the door, back to her cell. On the next episode of Ozark's True Crime, the Sandra Hemme story, we're heading to day 2 at the courthouse, where we find out about the man in charge of Sandy's investigation, Police Chief Robert Hayes.
After I ran that story, I was harassed repeatedly for quite a long period of time by the police department. I had an investigator who told me that the chief of police had told whom, I don't know, that I needed to be killed, and this investigator offered to give me a gun and show me how to use it so that I could protect myself.
The Sandra Hemme story is part of the Edit Audio original series Ozark's True Crime. It is written and hosted by me, Ann Roderick Jones. This episode was produced by Ali Sirwa and Kathleen Speckert and was edited, mixed, and mastered by Ali Sirwa. Additional editing by Maria Passinum. Our executive producer is Steph Colburn. Thank you immensely to the entire Edit Audio team and to Patrick Rendell for the theme music. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at hello@editaud.io. That's HELLO@EDITAUD.io.